Welcome to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger. Thank you for joining me this morning, this afternoon, or this evening, whenever you're listening to the podcast. Right now, as I am recording, it is raining outside. We've got a tropical storm here in Houston. Kind of popped up out of nowhere. It was just a tropical wave, and then all of a sudden this morning, right before landfall, it was upgraded to a tropical storm. So I hope I don't eat my words here, but I think we should be fine. We are going to get a lot of rain over the next few days, but it should be nothing comparable to Harvey. But we should still be safe, and if you are listening to this in Houston, please be safe out there. If the storm's already passed, or you live somewhere else in the world not affected by our tropical storms or hurricanes, then disregard. Just be thinking about us here in Houston. All right, so in this podcast, I wanted to talk about The Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening. Out ahead of Link's Awakening being re-released on the Nintendo Switch coming up here on September 20th, which I believe is Friday. And it's not just a remaster per se. It's not just basically an 8-bit retro-looking remaster of the original Game Boy version of Link's Awakening. No, this is a completely redone remake of Link's Awakening, and I can't wait. It looks absolutely stunning. Have any of you played Octopath Traveler? I believe it's by Square Enix, the people who do Final Fantasy and all that. Octopath Traveler is another game that's just visually stunning. It's kind of a mix between 8-bit style or 16-bit style and kind of modern elements. So you have ocular occlusion and everything like that going on graphically in the background. Ocular occlusion has this weird effect. I believe it's ocular occlusion if I'm not thinking about the right thing. But basically everything in the foreground and the background is blurry, and anything centered is focused. It makes it look like it's a very short or a very narrow focal length of a camera. So it has this effect of making things look miniature. You see that effect, the tilt shift kind of effect on photographs of big cities, to where it makes the big, huge city look like a small model. It's a weird kind of psychological effect on the brain, but it's really, really cool. It looks really well done, especially in a video game. And I realize that's a bit polarizing. Some people, I've heard, some people don't like that kind of tilt shift effect in Octopath Traveler, and they on the PC version, they go onto the config and everything like that and disable it. I think it looks really cool. I think it adds dimension to the game. And again, I don't think it's most people who dislike the effect. I am just at least one of those people who really like the effect. Why I'm saying this is that Link's Awakening for the Nintendo Switch has this effect. And it's not the 16-bit, 8-bit effect or anything like that. It's not kind of retro blending or anything like that that's popular nowadays. It looks like a kind of Wind Waker-ish. If you remember what the kind of cell shaded, except not cell shaded. I don't know how to describe it, but it looks gorgeous. It's going to be in high definition. So on your actual Switch in portable mode, it'll be at 1280 by 720. And then I imagine when you hook it up to the dock, it'll be at full 1080. Either way, it looks gorgeous. I keep forgetting how good the Nintendo Switch screen looks, because on paper you hear, oh, it's only a 720p display on the Nintendo Switch. Have you seen the Nintendo Switch display? It looks gorgeous. It is sharp, and it's not the biggest display in the world, so believe me, 720p is still a resolution and a pixel per inch that makes things sharp and crisp and clear. And if you didn't tell people that it was only 720p, I think a lot of lay people would just assume it was probably 4K or at least 1080p. 720 translates really well to smaller screens. It's kind of like 4K monitors on laptops. If you have a little 13-inch laptop, 4K doesn't really make a difference unless you're kind of a content creator and you need that resolution. But on that small of a screen, 4K doesn't make sense. So it's the same thing on Nintendo Switch, and the Link's Awakening remake looks gorgeous. And I want to just talk about Link's Awakening in general, and I'm going to focus kind of more on just the game itself, the Game Boy game, the Game Boy Color game, things like of that nature, because Link's Awakening on the Nintendo Switch does not deviate from the story very much, if at all. It's going to have a lot of Easter eggs and a lot of nods to the original and everything like that, but it's the core of the story is the same. It's not Link's Awakening 2 or a prequel to Link's Awakening. No, it's going to be the story we know and love from Link's Awakening on the Game Boy, just on the Switch, and looking gorgeous with all sort of creature comforts added in as far as how you can utilize items, and it just makes, life a little bit easier in that regard, or at least it's promised to. The game isn't out yet. But I have no doubt in my mind that it's going to be one of the best games of the year on the Nintendo Switch, and I am very excited for it. Very, very, very excited for it. If it was just an HD remake of the Game Boy game, basically pixels, but at very much higher definition, I wouldn't be so excited about it. But since it's a complete remake, but it holds on to the core story, I am quite excited about it. So, Link's Awakening. You heard the music. That's what I played on the intro to the podcast here, is the opening music for Link's Awakening. And when I fade out of the podcast, I'm going to play the save file selection screen music at the end of the podcast to kind of bump us out, because I think it's one of the best, not just for nostalgia reasons, but just I love the way it sounds. It's such a simple, repetitive theme, but it's one of the best kind of selection menu themes I think ever. And it's funny that it came out of the humble Game Boy with its limited sound power and limited processing power, but most importantly, the limited kind of sound capabilities that it had. It invokes so much feeling of grandeur, and you're about to go on this adventure, and it just fills your heart with joy and adventure, and you get psyched for what you're about to play. So very often when I go back to playing Link's Awakening on my Game Boy Color back here, I will sit at the file selection screen for a little bit and just listen. And just listen to it. Matter of fact, I try to, for those of you who don't know, I do dabble in music. Maybe I'll start featuring more of my music on the podcast, but mostly I'm an acoustic singer-songwriter. But I do dabble in electronic music sometimes. And one of the songs I wanted to remix was going to be based on the file selection screen of Link's Awakening. But I found that in my case, it was hard to do. Maybe I just kind of lost inspiration because it already sounds great. There's not much way to improve upon it without adding too much. In my case, I'm sure there are remixes out there from much better electronic musicians than I, but in my case, I just left it alone because I thought it sounds great. It's all it needs to be coming out of that little Game Boy speaker. So I didn't mess with it too much after that. That file selection screen starts telling you all you need to know about the rest of the game and what you're getting yourself into. If the file selection screen can sound that amazing, and just coming from the humble Game Boy, like I mentioned, the rest of the game you're in for a treat. And boy, howdy, were you in for a treat with Link's Awakening on the Game Boy. To this date, it is still one of the most beautiful looking games, just graphically, one of the most beautiful looking games on the Game Boy. And without a doubt, it is one of the games with the most character out of any video game on any video game system ever. There's so much character in Link's Awakening that it just fills your heart with glee and joy. Every single character in the game is so thoughtful and endearing, so thoughtfully designed and created, and so endearing to the heart, right down to the chickens that are just kind of hopping around. Even the chickens have their own endearing character. There is a level of thoughtfulness that went into designing this game. Apparently, it was designed in about a year and a half it took them to design. We'll get into that in a moment because that's a fascinating story as well. But there's so much thoughtfulness that went into this game that what did I say that the Game Boy was 160 pixels by 144 pixels? I think that's right. It didn't have a lot to work with, but you felt so immersed And it's one of the games that you really, really can escape into. And again, it's originally it's on a black and white screen. It was ported to the Game Boy Color for Link's Awakening DX. It had an extra dungeon in the DX version of the game. But it wasn't working with a lot of horsepower. It wasn't like a modern PlayStation 4 or soon to be PlayStation 5 or a modern PC with a ray tracing and RTX 2080 Ti graphics processor and ultra immersive virtual reality that we have, the Oculus Rift and everything like that. No, it was just a little 1 or 2 inch Game Boy screen at its most basic black and white, but it sucked you into the world. You felt like you were in the world. You felt like you were on the island. What was the island called? Kohelet Island? I need to look it up. I know that's very, 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 very close. Let me look at the Wikipedia here. Now I'm blanking out on it. It's gonna bug me until I mention it. Yeah. Koholint. Sorry, I said Koholint. It's Koholint. Koholint. It really sucked you into the game. It's very immersive. And on that note of Koholint Island, this was the first Legend of Zelda game that didn't take place in Hyrule. There's a lot of things about Link's Awakening that deviated from the relatively young formula at the time of Zelda. So it's just Link. There's a vague reference to Zelda, but she is not in the game. It's not the Triforce. The whole system of the game is completely different, including this is the first. Remember, Link to the Past came out before this, but this Link's Awakening was the first Zelda game to incorporate the jumping mechanic. Remember, this is an overhead game for the most part. There's a couple parts in it that are side-scrolling and a throwback to the original Super Mario Brothers, which is so cool. There's so much of that cool stuff in Link's Awakening. But it's the first game that had jumping. And part of me thinks that given the kind of free-form nature of the development of the game, they incorporated the jumping mechanic. Maybe because they wanted to do a couple sections of the game at least, even if it was only one section of the game where you jump on a Goomba. Link is jumping on a Goomba. Maybe they wanted the jump mechanic just so that part makes sense. They could have had the jump mechanic only in that one part, and then it would make the overworld parts kind of seem silly. Like, why can he jump only in this cave, but he can't jump in the overworld? Maybe it would be too ridiculous, so they just said, we're going to let him jump in the entire game. It's the first Zelda game that we have Link given the ability to jump. But since it was such a freewheeling kind of free-form game, just with the breeze kind of programming, it allowed for these things to happen, including very thoughtful breaks of the fourth wall. The little kids you run into in the game tell you mechanics of the game, like how to save your game, but then they always follow it up with, I'm just a kid, I don't know what I'm talking about, though. Something like that. It's the programmers reaching out and telling you how to do something, and then taking it back in. But we're just kids. We don't understand the advice we're giving you. It's just something they've been told. They're telling you how to save a video game, but they're in the video game. How do they know they're in a video? Anyways, it's all so fun. It just brings a smile to your face. So to the development of Link's Awakening, this was an after-hours side project at the beginning. Nintendo originally didn't okay the idea. They didn't. At least they weren't ready to make a Zelda port to the Game Boy. So this became kind of a passion project, after-hours project of a key number of individuals in Zelda. And long story short, by the end of it, Nintendo liked it so much, of course, that they were able to release it. So the director was Takashi Tezuka. Producer was, of course, Shigeru Miyamoto. I don't know when he came in. He's the big deal at Nintendo. So I don't think Shigeru was on board at the very beginning. But since it's a Nintendo product, of course, he had to jump in there at least towards the end, if anything else. Programmers, Takamitsu Kazuhara and Kazuhuke, I'm probably butchering these, Morita, artist Yoriichi Katabe. Writers were actually some of the writers, Yoshaki Kizumui, Kensuke Tanabe. Composers, my favorite, Minoko Hamano and Kazuie Ishikawa. Man, I butchered those. I apologize from the bottom of my heart. But it's a relatively small team that went into this. It was released originally for the Game Boy in 1993, basically in summer of 1993 in North America and Japan, and then later in fall in Europe, fall and December. So the Game Boy Color port came out 5 years later in 1998, around Christmas time 1998, across the world. Winter in the rest of the world. So a little bit about the project. That I can't stress enough the kind of the free-form nature of this project. Originally, the engine and mechanics of it all were meant to, it came out years earlier. It was part of the Game Boy development kit. And the original programmer who basically got started on creating Link's Awakening was just doing it to dabble, just to kind of push the limits and test the Game Boy's hardware and features and what could this do. But it grew from there into an actual legit project with the intention for release. But early on, like I mentioned, Nintendo wasn't having it. But eventually Nintendo saw the dedication and time these people were putting into it, and then they went full force behind the project. Said absolutely release this, and glad they did, because in total the game sold over 6 million copies worldwide. That's the point of this story that I kind of want to, that I'm gravitating towards, that I'm making a big deal out of, because, you know, the nature of the show, for those of my regular listeners, know that we are all geeks about something. It's possible to work in a job where your 9 to 5 is programming. In these guys' cases, they're programming for other games, doing other projects, which, of course, you know, they like it as much as they need to get the projects out. And maybe they like those projects they're working on 9 to 5 a lot, obviously. I mean, they're working in that industry. Of course, they would have to like it to some degree. But they stayed on after to work on something they were really geeking out about, something that they could really sink their teeth into, something that they were not getting paid to do. And they put so much heart and soul and energy and creativity into it, even though they weren't getting paid for it initially. And they didn't know that it would ever be released. They were just making this for themselves, basically. That's incredible. They were just doing it for themselves. And I think there's kind of a lesson in here somewhere, that when you put so much passion and creativity into doing something just for yourself, especially art, just doing it for yourself kind of breeds the most pure and the best end result possible, versus doing it to meet a deadline, doing it to make some money, doing it for whatever reason with a guillotine over your head and a timeline and a ticking clock, as they call it. It takes some of the passion out of it, if not all of it. But when you're doing something yourself, just in your own free time, for just the joy and love of it, you get something called The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. A masterpiece, one of the all-time, that's not just my opinion, it is one of the all-time best games ever since video games were created. Up until now, 2019, as of time of recording, every video game system, console in history, all the technology, all the culmination of technology, everything we have today, Link's Awakening on the Game Boy is one of the best video games in history, bar none. It makes almost every top 10 list of best video games in history by almost any critic. And it was all developed within 160 by 144 pixels, black and white originally. Just passion, just out of love, out of pure love for creating something. We get Link's Awakening. It wound up being sold. That's kind of like the cherry on top of all this is Nintendo saw the passion and saw that the product was absolutely amazing. When Link's Awakening came out for the Game Boy, it was jaw-dropping. Like I mentioned at the beginning, it is a visually beautiful game. If you've never seen Link's Awakening on a Game Boy, look at it. And yes, by modern standards, it can appear kind of crude, but look at anything else on the Game Boy. Look at most everything else on the Game Boy. Look at the original Super Mario Land on Game Boy, and then look at Link's Awakening. It's a night and day difference in the depth of the game, the absolute sheer depth, and all the exploration and all the missions you can do and side quests you could do, and hidden Easter eggs, and all the character that I mentioned before. And they had nods to other characters in other Nintendo games, even. The Chomp. At one point in the game, Link can walk Chomp like a dog. It helps him in a marsh or a swamp somewhere, at least. It's such a cute game. Can I say that? Can I say that Link's Awakening is such a cute game? It's so endearing. I just love it to pieces, and I'm so excited that a new generation gets to experience the joy on the Nintendo Switch. My heart erupts with happiness that a new generation of gamers are going to experience at least some of what we experienced who grew up with the Game Boy. And it's a kind of a tightrope that the new game is going to balance with visual beauty. Like I said, perhaps I think the game looks so visually beautiful on the Switch because I had already created a world in my mind with the Game Boy. And I think that the Nintendo Switch is doing a fairly good job of bringing that the world we created in our mind to the big screen, is doing justice to it. And you know that Nintendo is being faithful with this. They know the hardcore legion of us Link's Awakening fans who are going to pick this game apart pixel by pixel with criticism. They know we're going to be harsh on it. They know we can be harsh on it. Will we be harsh on it? That's yet to see. I highly doubt it. Like I mentioned a few minutes ago, I think it's going to be one of the best games of the year on the Nintendo Switch, if not one of the best games of the year, period. Best game of all time? I don't know. You'd have to give that title to the original Link's Awakening, one of the best games of all time. So I'll start wrapping it up with that. I am very excited about Link's Awakening coming to the Nintendo Switch. It's going to be a fantastic addition to the game library on the Nintendo Switch, and I, for one, am absolutely stoked. Side note on the way out, what's Grid? It's a racing game. I love racing games. Grid is also coming to the Switch. The best racing game on Switch, in my opinion, is Mario Kart 8, but I am a huge fan of the Grid series of games, and I am stoked that it's coming to the Nintendo Switch. Link's Awakening for the Nintendo Switch comes out September 20th. That is this Friday if you're listening to this before Friday. So be sure to grab it on the Nintendo Switch if you like. I'm not your boss. You can do what you want with your money, but I am very excited for it. Until next time, remember that you are worthy of love, being loved, giving love, receiving love. You are worthy of love. We are all geeks about something. Embrace your inner geek. And I'll see you next time. And don't forget to drop me a line if you want. GeekTherapy@iheartmedia.com.